today's webinar, Animal Abuse and Juvenile Offending. It is part 2 of a 2-part webinar series on animal cruelty and interpersonal violence. And we appreciate that I think most of you or many of you who are on today's webinar also participated in last week's webinar where we focused specifically on animal cruelty and child abuse. So this webinar, as was last week's webinar, is part of a series of trainings that the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges is offering to juvenile and family court judges through our unique partnership that we have with the Animal Legal Defense Fund. Now, just as we did in the first webinar, we're making available links and resources that are mentioned during the webinar for downloading, and Elisha kind of pointed you to where those resources are in terms of web links as well as files that you can download. So just a little recap for those who either were attending last week's webinar or are just attending today's webinar. In the first webinar, we learned about the link between animal cruelty and interpersonal violence in general, and we received some history on the concern for animal welfare, the link between animal welfare and child welfare, and the growing research that establishes links between animal cruelty and interpersonal violence. We know that in the context of families, when abuse and harms of humans occur, pets are at risk for maltreatment. And when abuse and harms of pets occur, humans are also at risk for being hurt. So as I mentioned in today's webinar, the focus will be looking specifically at the link between animal cruelty and juvenile offending. This is an important topic, and we are glad you are interested in learning more about it. But we also appreciate that due to the nature of the topic, some of the specific examples may be disturbing. So please feel welcome to use self-care during the webinar as you need it. Now I would like to introduce our speakers for today's webinar. We're so fortunate to have some great experts who will be sharing their knowledge and experience in the field and guidance, especially for those of you who are judicial officers and when you are encountering cases of juvenile offenders that involve animal cruelty. I think today's coverage will give you some really helpful tips on what questions to ask and expertise to turn to assist you with your decisions. So today's speakers include Jamie Contreras. She's a senior attorney with the Animal Legal Defense Fund. And prior to joining the ALDF staff in 2019, Ms. Contreras did appellate work for the Oregon Department of Justice for several years. She successfully represented the state of Oregon in some groundbreaking animal law cases before the Oregon Supreme Court. And one of those cases included State versus Nix, where the court recognized animals as the victims of the crime of animal neglect. And we also have with us today the Honorable Lee Chitwood. He is a district court judge for Virginia's 27th Judicial District's Juvenile and Domestic Relations District Court, which is located in Pulaski, Virginia. And I'm happy to say that Judge Chitwood has been active in the partner project that NCJFTJ has had with Animal Legal Defense Fund since its inception in 2019. And then our third presenter is Dr. Barbara Walling-Boat. She's a licensed clinical psychologist and associate professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Neuroscience at the University of Cincinnati College of Medicine, and also the director of the program on childhood trauma and maltreatment. In addition, she is one busy professional. She is the executive director of the Childhood Trust at Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center. As you can tell, we've got some folks with great expertise. We're really glad to have these speakers share their knowledge with you. In terms of the flow of our time together, we plan to save a little time at the end for questions. But please feel free to enter your questions into the chat box throughout the webinar, and I will keep track of them. Now I can turn to our first speaker, Jamie Contreras, to get us started. Jamie, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Martha. I'll begin by saying what an honor and a pleasure it is to be with all of you. Not only my esteemed co-presenters who have just a ton to offer, but such an experienced group of in our audience, judicial staff, judges, practitioners, evaluators, caseworkers. There's just there's a wealth of expertise out there, and it's an honor to be presenting this information to you. Martha covered some of the things that I wanted to cover, and the first thing is that, you know, I would urge you to go back and watch the first presentation if you didn't get a chance to do that. Judge Romero and Diane Balkin presented a fabulous primer on the link generally. But today we're going to be talking, our focus is going to be on delinquency proceedings. First of all, let me introduce you to our executive producers, some of our executive producers here, our co-staff, if you will. We'll be talking about, let me start with a little bit about the format. I'll run through some information about the link as specific to juvenile offending, and talk about the reasons why we're here, really. You know, the reasons for this webinar, why animal cruelty committed by children should sit up and make everyone take notice that something might be going on in these children's lives that's causing them to engage in this behavior. Then I'll turn it over to Judge Chitwood. He and I will engage in a question and answer session. We'll discuss the context in which animal cruelty comes up in his courtroom, what he considers to be the key information that he needs to make decisions at every step of the process in a delinquency case that involves animal cruelty. Some of the questions that we will address will tee things up for Dr. Boat, and I should say that we've given each other carte blanche to jump in with questions and comments as things occur to us. This is a pretty informal discussion, but we have a lot to cover, so we're going to try to go through it pretty quickly. Then Dr. Boat will speak to her experience and insights as an evaluator of children who commit animal cruelty and her insights as a clinical psychologist. She'll do that and answer some of the questions that Judge Chitwood and I talk about in the context of a case study. And we'll discuss what judges, caseworkers, and practitioners should look for and what makes for a good evaluation. She will also introduce you to a key tool that is the Childhood Trust Inventory on Animal-Related Experiences, or what you will see in the literature referred to repeatedly as the Boat Inventory. She created it, and so it's wonderful to have her available to talk about it. We will do our best to answer your questions. We'll save time at the end. Please pose them as we go along. We'll be keeping an eye on those questions, and we'll do our best to answer them. If questions occur to you later, however, or if we're not able to get to everything, we'll include our email information at the end of the presentation. So that'll be on a slide for you at the end, and the PowerPoint will be available for download. So I've listed the learning objectives, and I think those are things that we should that I just talked about that we'll be covering. We'll want you to be able to or at the end of this presentation, you'll recognize that a child who commits animal abuse may have him or herself been abused, or may have witnessed domestic violence or animal abuse. You'll know the factors that judges should consider when faced with a case involving animal abuse, and you'll know what questions and facts are relevant when evaluating a child who has committed an act of abuse, and how to hopefully intervene effectively. So with that, I will jump into some background about the link between violence, or animal violence and violence to children, or trauma in a child's life. I'll begin by saying that animals are part of the family, and that's kind of it's a background piece that's important to remember for everything that's going to follow here. Nearly 70% of households include one or more pets or companion animals, and almost all, 99% of families that have those animals consider them to be family members. So animals are part of the family, and so that can be a wonderful thing. If you want to read something very happy about the human-animal bond, and specifically the bond between children and animals, I encourage you to look up Reagan Doodle and Little Buddy. It's a local duo whose picture is up on your screen. It's a really neat story about a foster child who bonded with his dog in his foster family, ended up being his forever family. Anyway, very good, feel-good story. So the bond between a child and an animal can be great, and can be a great source of strength and comfort. It can also be a problem it can be dangerous, for an animal to be part of the family if the home is a violent home. Just like a small child, just like any child is vulnerable within a violent family, an animal is, as a family member, is also vulnerable to that same violence. Animal abuse is a form of family violence. And so what we're going to be talking about today isn't exclusively talking about animals in the family. There's certainly children can commit acts of abuse against animals outside the family, but animals in the home are particularly vulnerable whenever there's abuse, whether that abuse is from an adult or from a child. Something to know, I think if you had to condense this what I'm going to be talking about into a nutshell, children traumatized by violence are more likely to commit animal cruelty. The two most common factors are exposure, or in the background of a child who commits animal cruelty, are exposure to domestic violence and some form of child abuse, sexual or physical abuse, for example. And when you have more than one of those factors present, it's not like, it's not like one gets you, like it's domestic violence and that's going to get you to a certain level of likelihood that there's going to be more increased likelihood that a child will commit cruelty. These are additive. So if you have domestic violence and child abuse, you're going to have, the risk is even higher. And the more adverse childhood experiences, or what we call ACEs, you probably have heard that term before, the more of those, the higher the score, that the child is significantly more likely to commit an act of animal cruelty. And that's not to say that every child who's traumatized by violence is going to commit animal cruelty, but it's a red flag. Basically, when a child commits an act of abuse, we know that it's more common that they're going to have some of these issues in their background. Exposure to domestic violence, like I just said, is one of the key factors that increases the likelihood that a child will commit an act of cruelty. 60% of people who witness or perpetrate animal abuse also have experienced family violence. And children exposed to domestic violence are more aggressive than children without violent parents. And so you put those things together, and a child who is exposed to domestic violence kind of learns from that, witnessing it, is more aggressive, has more issues in their background. It makes them approximately 3 times more likely to commit animal cruelty. And I'll just interject quickly to say, if anybody wants the studies that set out these numbers, I'm happy to provide them. I haven't included them on the slides, but I have them at hand, so just let me know if you'd like them. Witnessing animal cruelty, even without more, even if the child is not directly abused, is dramatically increases the chance that a child will commit an act of cruelty. 8 times. They're 8 times more likely than a child who has not witnessed animal cruelty to themselves commit an act of cruelty. That might be social learning. If they see a parent do it, if they see someone else do it, they learn that it's acceptable, and they're significantly, far and away more likely to commit that act. So all of those things are things that should be, when a child has committed an act of abuse, it's like, well, why is this happening? Children generally don't have this. It doesn't happen very often, right? And if things are great at home, the chances of a child committing an act of abuse are slim. So animal abusers, and this is the predictive value. I mean, again, you don't know from the fact that someone has committed an act of animal abuse, you don't know what's going to happen, right? It's like the future, it remains to be written. You don't know exactly what's going to happen, but the research shows that people who commit animal abuse are also more likely to go on to commit other types of crimes. Animal cruelty, when it happens, is an early marker, earlier than lots of other markers of potential delinquency risk in the future. It can show up as early as 6.5 years old, or I think that's the median age, which is deeply concerning. Animal abusers are 5 times more likely to go on to hurt humans. And I say go on to. It's not a matter of graduating to a higher level of violence. It's just in terms of like looking retrospectively, people who have animal abuse in their background are 5 times more likely to also have injured humans. And they also are more likely, significantly more likely to commit multiple kinds of other offenses. It's not just violent offenses, it's property crime, drug crime, public order offenses. So it's, again, it's a marker of potential delinquency risk. So that's why we're here. And I would be remiss. I work for the Animal Legal Defense Fund, and I'm an certified animal person. And it's worth saying that crimes against animals are not victimless crimes. These are serious crimes in their own right. So that alone is concerning. But you add that to the fact that when a child is committing these crimes, it's a sign that everyone involved should sit up and take notice and think about, why is this happening? How can we get to the bottom of this? And how can we figure out what's going on in the child's family and potentially intervene to prevent it from happening again and prevent the child from committing future crimes? So with that, I will move on to Judge Chitwood, and we'll talk, he and I are gonna talk back and forth with some questions about his experience on the bench and when he deals with these cases. So welcome, Judge Chitwood.
Thank you.
So I don't know if you want to introduce anything or if we should just jump into the questions. I know we have an awful lot to cover.
I'll just say I'm equally honored to be here on this webinar, and let's jump in.
Thank you. Okay, so in your experience, when does animal abuse become an issue? Is it only when a child is charged with a crime of delinquency, or not a crime? And I know that it's when you're talking about delinquency court, you're not talking about commission of crimes, but something that would be a crime if an adult had committed it. Or are you seeing it in other contexts as well?
Of course, we're talking about delinquency today, but it can come up in multiple other settings: custody visitation, foster care, child protective orders, family abuse protective orders, and for lack of a better word, straightforward domestic violence, intimate partner domestic violence. So whatever context you see it in, it's serious, and you have to pay close attention.
Do you see crimes, or even in within the delinquency context? Do you see it come up where, say, you have a child who is accused of committing an act that would be a crime involving something else, property crime or a person crime, and animal abuse comes up? Has that ever happened for you?
No, it's primarily been a discrete offense. I haven't seen it in combination with other things.
Okay.
Now that child may come back after that, of course, with other crimes.
Right. So say you have an animal cruelty offense. It's a delinquency. It's before the hearing, and you have an allegation of abuse to an animal. What are your options to protect animals and the child before you even get started with the hearing? And what information is available to you at that stage to help you figure that out?
It may be limited, and it's going to depend how the case is presented to me. If it comes to me and the child has already been detained and I'm holding a detention hearing, then I should have a probation officer there ready to testify. I should have a police report that will give me some of the facts. And then most probation court service units have a standard tool like a YAZI to assess risk and give me an idea of whether I can should continue to detain that child or release that child. If I decide to release him, then I can put safeguards in place, home electronic confinement. I can take the animals out of the house. I can do things to protect the public. Now, if the child comes in, the child has not been detained, which for younger children is probably going to be more typical. The information is going to be more limited, and I may have to, certainly can't ask the child because I have to protect that child's Fifth Amendment privilege, but I can ask the parents, who else is living in the home? Are there animals in the home? The animal that is alleged to have been harmed, has that animal been removed from the house? Is there a way to safeguard the animals and the other folks that are in the house pre-trial? So I may have to sort of go outside my normal role and ask more questions than I would normally.
In your experience, are parents willing to give you that information? Are they compliant?
Yes, parents
Did
are.
they answer your question? Okay.
Parents are compliant, and most parents want their kids to be out of detention or willing to do whatever's necessary to help you get that child out of detention and back into the home.
Sure. Are in your county? I don't know what the practice is. If you know, there's a standard practice nationwide, but are children always represented by counsel in delinquency proceedings in your county?
Yes. If they come in for an arraignment, then I'm going to, arraign them. I'm going to appoint counsel at that point. If they've already been detained and they come in for detention hearing, then they will have counsel present, already appointed as soon as we get the detention order, the arrest order. So yes, they'll always have counsel. Sorry.
Oh, don't be sorry. Do you have a guardian ad litem appointed ever at this stage of the game, or is that something that comes later?
If I can jump back for just 1 second, Jamie.
Sure.
If a child comes in and wants to waive their right to counsel, I never let that happen. There's not a 12 or 14-year-old that has the ability to represent themselves in court. So if they come in and say they don't want an attorney, I'm going to ask them, I'm going to make sure it's a voluntary and knowing and intelligent waiver of their right to counsel, and they're never going to be able to satisfy me that it is. So I'm always going to appoint a lawyer for them. But to get back to your question, at the arraignment stage, I can appoint a separate guardian ad litem for that child. So if it comes in, it's something that really frightens me, that I'm worried about. In addition to court-appointed counsel, I'll appoint a guardian ad litem. And in the order of appointment for the guardian ad litem, I can direct that guardian ad litem to investigate specific things. Who's in the house? What other pretrial safeguards do we need to put in place? What recommendations can the guardian ad litem make when they come to adjudication? Because I think the guardian ad litem's got a larger, broader role and will be able to gather more information and talk more about what is in the child's best interest versus court-appointed counsel.
Sure, that makes sense. So moving on to adjudication, I know time is short and we have a lot to cover. What facts do you need to know? I mean, you mentioned at the pre-hearing stage, you mentioned that when something really frightens you. I imagine the same thing is going to be true at adjudication. What facts do you need to know to evaluate risk, and what are the things that really do frighten you in these cases?
I thought a lot about this question over the weekend, and I know Barbara's going to talk about red flags, but to me, animal cruelty in any child is a red flag. It's not, unless it's something extremely petty, it's not normal behavior. It's not something we can simply ignore or something we can pass off as normal childhood behavior. So I would encourage you not to accept plea agreements with these cases unless you have an absolute mastery of the facts. Everything that happened. The Commonwealth attorney, the prosecutor can give you a full description of what happened and why the plea agreement is the best thing to do. Otherwise, I'm probably going to accept the plea, and then I'm going to order a probation report so that I can get more information before I make a decision.
So you'd accept the guilty plea, but you would demand more facts before moving on. You wouldn't accept like a stipulated disposition.
Right. If they're going to, it's treated as if it were destruction of a street light or reckless driving or something of that nature. This is more serious than that, more scary than that, and I want more information before I make a decision.
So when it comes to, we lost a very cute graphic. I don't know what happened there. But moving on to disposition, what are your goals when you're trying to figure out the appropriate disposition? And I know that in determining what the conditions are, you probably need a psych evaluation. But it seems to me, I'm just wondering about the timing. I mean, it seems like you need the evaluation before you can determine the disposition. I know I'm asking probably multiple questions at once here. So let me back up for a second and say, first of all, can you address your goals? What are you trying to get at when you're constructing the proper disposition?
Well, my ultimate goal is always going to be the best interest of the child that's standing in front of me. But at the same time, I have a duty to protect that family. I have a duty to protect that animal and other animals in the community. And I have a duty to protect the community at large. So I've got to balance those goals, but keeping in mind that ultimately the best interest of this specific child is what my focus is. And then in terms of
timing,
okay.
Please go ahead.
At that adjudication, I'm going to order my court service unit, my probation folks, to do a full social history, and I'm also going to order a psychological evaluation so that when we come back for disposition, I have those things in hand to help me make a good decision.
Oh, great. Okay, so you have the evaluation done before you're crafting disposition. The evaluation isn't part of the dispositional order.
Exactly. I want that in hand. I want the recommendations before I make a decision. Great.
So how do you determine who the evaluator is? I mean, do you have just a list of people that you kind of, just hand it off to the next person in line, or do you have any role in choosing the evaluator in these cases?
I live in a very rural area, a town of about 8,000 people, a county of about 35,000. We do not have numerous trained folks like Dr. Boat who could do this. So ordinarily the court service unit, the probation folks, are going to select the evaluator, but I am going to make certain that whoever they select has the proper qualifications. So that if that person is not in the community, I want them to go outside the community and get someone who has the correct training. I'm probably not going to find somebody of Dr. Boat's qualifications, but I don't mean this in a mean way, but I don't just want any psychologist who doesn't have specific training in this area to do the evaluation.
To that end, what information do you provide the evaluator, and do you have any communication directly with that person, or is just like a file and a copy of I don't know what they get. Can you explain to us how that works?
I won't have any direct communication with the evaluator. We'll send them a copy of the court order. Then they will get information they'll get a police report, they'll get information from the court service unit so that they have a full understanding of the facts. They won't get a copy of the entire probation report since it's confidential. But if I have specific things that I want the evaluator to comment upon, then I'll put that in my order. Please respond to this. Please let me know about this, because I think as a judge, we have the absolute duty to get the best evaluation we can, and we should send specific questions to them.
So we're just quickly, once you get that evaluation back, okay, so you then just, with the timing, you get the evaluation back, and then what do you, I know the slide that's up says monitoring, but we're still back to disposition. What do you do with that evaluation? So you have it in front of you. What are you trying to do? What are the factors that you consider when you're crafting conditions of release or determining whether a child should be remanded to custody?
Well, the essence of what I want to know, I know nothing is this simple, but what I want to know is what caused this behavior. As the judge said last week in the other webinar, this does not happen in a vacuum. So I want to know what was the source of this behavior. And then I want to know, what does this behavior tell us about the future? Is it an isolated incident that with proper treatment, proper therapy, proper supervision, I'm not going to see again? Or is it in fact the first event for a young person who's going to become a domestic violence abuser or worse? So I'm asking a lot of Dr. Boat and the other professionals, but that's what the essence of it. What brought this about, and what do I need to put in place so that it doesn't happen in the future?
That makes complete sense. So how do you, when you've crafted those conditions, how do you, and this goes to monitoring, what is your role in seeing what happens from there? I mean, do you have check-ins with the person who's providing the treatment? Do you get periodic reports?
I would not. What I would either do is place this child on supervised probation with whatever conditions were recommended. And then I could either A, rely on my probation officer to bring the child back into court if they didn't comply. But I think a better method would be to set it for periodic reviews. Set a review out in 4 months, 3 months, to make sure that they've started their counseling, that they're meeting with their probation officer. If it's an older child, they're drug and alcohol free. And then if that comes back, they're doing well, maybe I'll set it out in 6 months. I think the more often you see that child and check their progress, the better.
Do you get, or does the appointment of counsel, does that continue so that the child would remain represented by the same attorney for those check-ins?
Yes, that attorney is going to stay appointed or retained for that matter from beginning to end. If a new charge came in of violating probation or violating the conditions, then we would go through the arraignment process and officially appoint that same attorney to the new charge. But yes, they stay in it from beginning to end.
And this is off script, but it's a question that I had. Have you ever had something come up during in the evaluation or during a delinquency proceeding that has led you to somehow initiate a dependency proceeding as well, based on what you know about the family and what role that's played in the child's commission of the offense?
Absolutely. Of course, I've got the authority at disposition to place that child in the custody of our local Department of Social Services. You know, I'd have to appoint a guardian ad litem. I'd have to appoint counsel for the parents, give notice to the Department of Social Services, but absolutely I have the power. And if the parents are not complying, I mean, this would not be something I would do lightly. I don't mean to suggest that, but I certainly have the power to do that.
Okay, I think we've gone a little bit over time, but that was great. Thank you so much for that information. And I think that will probably give Dr. Boat a little more information she might want to respond to, in addition to the case study that she's going to talk about. So take it away, Dr. Boat.
Oh, I will. Can you hear me okay? All right. I guess I'll be number 3 in saying how honored I am to present with my colleagues from the Animal Legal Defense Fund and the National Coalition on Juvenile and Family Court Judges, because we are all in this together, so thank you. So, you know, I can't cover, obviously, all the aspects of an evaluation in this shorter period of time, and there are excellent resources at the end of this webinar that are available for you to use. But I want to really focus on 2 takeaways. The first is it's always relevant to ask about the experiences the child has had with animals. And secondly, I'd like to offer a tool that might be helpful to you, and this again is down in your files and available for you to download. It's the Childhood Trust Survey on animal-related experiences. And I'd like to embed this tool in a case. This was not my case, but I call the case The Boys Who Blew Up a Car. And the incident was these 2 adolescent boys set fire to a kitten that ran under a car. The car caught on fire. Car blew up and the boys were apprehended. Now the evaluator who contacted me said, you know, I have evaluated boys who have killed other kids, but this is the worst case I've ever seen. And the public defender who was in the courtroom said, now listen, I would like this case dismissed because it was just a cat, and a cat is not a socially useful animal. Unfortunately, the judge did not buy that. The child was adjudicated delinquent and the evaluation was ordered. And part of the evaluation was to assess this family's ability to actually support the treatment that the boy might need. And I'd like you to notice in these quotes kind of the minimization that runs through the way in which this family talks about this boy. His mother called him a mean, hard-headed baby. He tore up his playpen, and whipped a little too hard by his father when his father was drunk. You can start counting the aces in this family. Charles, likewise, was a great minimizer. My mom would kind of get scratched up. Well, the mother had actually sustained retinal damage when her husband hit her with a beer bottle, and she had many symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. The father's type of minimization was he was a social drinker, but he already had 3 DUIs. And what do you think of this? I never beat her for no reason. He'd been charged with domestic violence 6 times during the 13-year marriage. The charges were dropped. He also did not know much at all about his son. Charles was already having major problems. He had failed the 6th grade. There was a larceny charge on him. He had stolen a teacher's purse. And what was really concerning about Charles were some of his impulsive kind of behaviors and almost PTSD-like symptoms in him, as well as some potentially dissociative or even psychotic features, a voice telling him to do it, do it. James, who was with him, gave this account. He said, me and Charles were at the bus stop and we were playing with the cat. And Charles said, let's burn the cat. So we found some lighter fluid. I got some matches. We both tried to light it. When it was lit, we ran. We didn't know the cat was on fire. We thought the cat was a stray. And right there and then you get the sense of the species prejudice. And still in many areas, a stray cat is pretty much considered a worthless animal. And then taking a look at Charles and potential for empathy, the questions were asked, well, what did it look like when it was running away? Like it was on fire. And how did the cat sound? Made a high-pitched noise. How do you think the cat felt? And Charles said, I guess mad. And you get a sense of a child who is so shut down that he cannot raise the window on his own feelings, much less try to empathize with the feelings of another living organism. So at this point, he was going to ask him the questions on the survey. And you'll notice that when you look at the survey, there'll be both the questions, there are 10 screening questions, and there'll also be a description of why each of these questions was chosen. And I want to say, please, please don't just give this to a child and say, fill it out. This is an interview instrument, and you will miss so much good information if you're not there talking directly to the child. So why would we ask about number of pets? It's because there's some tantalizing research, granted done in 2003, that showed in homes where children were physically abused and the pets were also abused, that their pets were younger. They didn't live very long. And there were lots of pets and a rapid turnover of pets. So when you get the child listing pet after pet after pet, and you say, well, what happened to all of them? And the child says, I don't know. You know, either grandma got rid of them or they ran away. So it's a sign of a more chaotic household that cannot care either for pets or for the children. The important question is if the child has ever had a favorite or a special pet. And remember, I would like to know that they can have this kind of attachment, but at the same time, we know that being attached to a pet is vulnerable because you're vulnerable to loss and you're also potentially vulnerable to someone using that pet against you to coerce you to do something. We ask, was there ever a time when you were upset or whatever happened and your pet was a source of comfort to you? And one 14-year-old boy said, yeah, after my stepfather would beat me, my dog would jump up and lick my tears. We didn't know his stepfather was beating him. It's just in the context of talking about their pets, they will give you a window on their world. We ask about if they were ever worried about their pet being safe, if it was ever lost, and also, you know, how is your pet taught to be good? What happens when your pet is bad, when your pet is naughty? What happens to your pet? A window on the world? Of corporal discipline. Seen someone hurt an animal? Have you hurt an animal? And the last one, I urge us over and over again to be sure and ask, have you ever been frightened or hurt by an animal? Because there are so many walking wounded out there in the world, and we know how to treat the sequelae of animal bites, but rarely are these children referred. And I think sometimes what they're going to do is they're going to go after an animal before that animal goes after them. So let's look at Charles's responses. Well, many pets, right? This is a lot of animals in his 13 years of life. And there is a species prejudice again. He never had a cat because his father dislikes cats. He denied ever being cruel to an animal, so didn't seem to have much of a sense of what that was, but this is important, and I'll come back to it later. 2 dogs were special and a source of comfort to him. So the recommendations that came forward were several. Consider medication. Child might need to be placed out of home. Want to talk later about this probation idea, and to the Humane Society. And the important thing was the recommendations involved the entire family. Everyone had the opportunity now to perhaps receive some kind of intervention in their lives. When we look at the purpose of animal abuse specific evaluations, what is needed are to be able to look at the behavioral and the mental health and the trauma-based issues going on in this child's life. And as the judge said, to estimate the risk to both the animals and the community. And finally, to recommend interventions, disposition, and some kind of supervision. And this is a big load. I think we really are upgrading what evaluator qualifications need to be, because in addition to having a thorough understanding of the incident, needs to know something about the animal abuse laws, both locally and in the area. And it's incredibly important, I think, that this evaluator really know the normative kinds of behaviors to be expected out of children and adults, in both their cognitive and their emotional development, because I would expect an evaluator to be able to cover the waterfront. It's not just about the child, but you're also assessing, the entire framework in which this child is living. So knowledge of mental health diagnoses, etc., and then open-ended access to the entire social support network around this youth, and including, of course, the school. And finally, I think this evaluator has to have self-knowledge and self-awareness, because this work is not for the faint-hearted. Evaluators need to call on their colleagues for support. And as one person said to me one time, he said, Barbara, it's time to unplug from the drama and treat the trauma. Positive aspects of the evaluation of Charles that come out are, first place, this evaluator was aware of maintaining self-care. He called colleagues to get input. He interviewed multiple sources. He had a good history on the child of both past and current functioning, the developmental history, the parental history, the school history. I frankly really liked his use of quotes. I think it made the players in this come alive by including many, many quotes. He did survey the animal-related experiences within this family and within this child. He identified the needs of the family members, and I think that he really did pretty much document the inability of the current family to support the child's needs as they were at that time. Some things that I think he might have considered would be, first of all, to take a look at Randy Lockwood's checklist for factors in the assessment of dangerousness in perpetrators of animal cruelty. This came out in 2013. It's 33 different factors. And when we take a look at this case, it's concerning because there was restraint used and it involved the death of an animal. Fire was involved. There was a high risk of detection in it, no economic motive, and a real lack of insight into the motivation. And it seemed like the child we were evaluating, he was the instigator. Let's burn the cat. And you also want to consider in this the kind of PTSD and numbing and dissociative qualities in this boy. And a big problem with the community service recommendation in this case, because, he was not going to be able to go forward and do anything regarding community service. But one thing that came out in this was that 2 dogs were actually special and a source of comfort to this child.
One of the questions that came through, Judge Chitwood, if you're amenable, is if a family court or probate court investigator comes across information about violence done by a child in the course of a child custody investigation or probate court investigation, to what extent would you want to know about that?
I would absolutely 100% want to know that, because regardless of what decision you make, whether mom, dad, joint custody, grandmother, that child needs therapy and counseling, and you have to order the parents to be sure the child receives it. So I think it's absolutely essential to have that information. I wish I had child custody investigators. I don't know what they are. Sounds wonderful. But yes, to answer your question, I would absolutely want that information.
One of the questions that came through is how important is it for evaluators to have knowledge and training specific to intimate partner violence and child abuse and trauma generally, talking about qualifications for evaluators? Just the importance of training and knowledge about intimate partner violence and child abuse and trauma generally.
Yes, I think it's very important to have that entire range of knowledge. And if you don't have it, then get someone on your side who can help you with it, because it certainly is part of the entire evaluation.
Going back to your discussion of the case, can you talk some more about why the community service mandate was not appropriate?
I'm sorry, which case?
Oh, the case study that you're talking about. One of the things that you mentioned about the evaluation, I think it was at Charles, is that they had ordered or suggested community service relating to animals, and you had mentioned that was dangerous, and one of our listeners, viewers, wanted to hear more about why you thought that was not an appropriate condition. Yes.
Community service. Yeah, when someone, in general, when someone is having that kind of problems, I think they need to be carefully supervised and monitored. And sometimes community service is looked at as potentially punishment, and I think it should be part of the actual intervention, which is based on the mental health needs.
It's also a potential if you're ordering a child who has committed an act of violence against an animal to work with animals, that's its own concern. You know, there's a risk of re-victimization, I would think.
Yes. Yes, indeed.
I think there's going to.
So this is a question. Go ahead.
I think there's going to be this reflexive request to give kids community service hours at a shelter without really thinking about how dangerous that is. I think that you might see that because without really thinking about it, you think, well, that's a way to develop empathy, or that's a way to teach them the proper treatment of animals. But I agree with Dr. Bowe. You'd have to be very careful with that.
That makes complete sense. Another question that's come through is this one directed to Judge Chitwood. What if you learn about cruelty on the part of a parent that's uncovered during a custody investigation? So it's not, you know, cruelty of the child, but it's cruelty on the part of a parent during a custody investigation.
Cruelty to an animal, I presume.
Yes, I believe so.
Okay.
That's my assumption.
That's going to be something that I'm going to take very seriously. Because if there's cruelty to an animal, then there's going to be cruelty to a spouse, and there's going to be cruelty to a child, and that child is going to be reacting to it. So that person's probably going to get no visitation or supervised visitation with the child. It's just too scary and too dangerous to ignore, or just to lump with all the other factors we take into consideration. And it's got too many ramifications for everybody in the family and the animals in the family. And it's interesting to me that it comes up so rarely in the context of a custody case.
Well, I suppose it depends on the nature of the custody investigation of whatever these custody investigators do. If you have, because everyone, I suppose, is trying to put their best foot forward, and if you have someone who can really dig into the family dynamics, that might be helpful to determine more than you're seeing otherwise. So we're just about out of time, but we can probably throw in one more question if anyone has one. And if not, then I will move ahead to, again, we have this great information about these. Don't hesitate to ask us about these. The hit-free zone, these are posters. This is a program to put information about you know, to prevent violence, to put it, you can put it in your courtroom, you can put it anywhere, and encourage it. Also, there are, you can get information about how to de-escalate violence, and, you know, and kind of putting that information out of the world as much as possible is helpful. So please take a look at those and ask questions if you have them. Here's our contact information. Again, we had a ton of information to put before you, and we didn't get through all of it. So please don't hesitate to ask if you have questions going forward. And with that, I will turn it over. Well, first of all, thank you very much to my co-presenters, Judge Chitwood and Dr. Bowe. That was fantastic. And I will hand it off back to Martha and Elisha now.